we will not likely see the likes of Nelson Mandela again. So it falls to us, as best we can, to forward the example that he set, to make decisions guided not by hate but by love, to never discount the difference that one person can make, to strive for a future that is worthy of his sacrifice. For now, let us pause and give thanks for the fact that Nelson Mandela lived, a man who took history in his hands and bent the arc of the moral universe towards justice. A man who took history in his hands and bent the arc of the moral universe towards justice. We've lost one of the most influential, courageous, and profoundly good human beings that any of us will share time with on this earth. He no longer belongs to us. He belongs to the ages. He no longer belongs to us. He belongs to the ages. He no longer belongs to us. He belongs to the ages. He no longer belongs to us. He belongs to the ages.
Let me read you a quote. Outside of Jesus Christ and my parents, he is the one. These words from Bernice King, the daughter of one of America's most influential figures of social change, Dr. Martin Luther King. A man whose struggles and accomplishments, a world away, in a sense parallel the life of Mandela's, in a sense parallel the life of Mandela's, in a sense parallel the life of Mandela's. And Bernice King joins me now to talk about this. Bernice King, such a pleasure. Welcome to you. Nice to have you on.
Thank you, Brooke. I'm glad to be here.
Let's begin with when you were 27. It was 1990, and that was the year Mandela was released, and you had this realization as a 27-year-old that this man had been in prison your entire life.
My entire life.
Your entire life, and you decide to go to South Africa because you wanted to hear him speak. And what were you listening for?
Well, I was listening for any traces of anger, any traces of bitterness, because I was still wrestling at that point with a lot of anger and bitterness in my own life because of my losses. And I just knew this man had to have some. and so I told my mom I wanted to go to the inauguration, and she said, well, she can't afford to pay for it. And I told her at that time, because I'd been doing some public speaking, I said, well, I'll pay for it.
Your own money.
And I did just that, my own money, and I went to the inauguration with my mom and my brother Martin. And for me, it was so transforming. I mean, it was the beginning of my healing journey.
Wow. Because
I saw a man that spoke from a place of love and harmony and peace. And, I didn't hear, behind any kind of anger, any kind of resentment. He was able to rechannel all of that into a much more positive and a productive way to bring about this peaceful transformation and healing in a nation that desperately needed it and expeditiously needed it.
Healing a nation, and it sounds like healing you a little bit as well. You have said, Bernice, that Dr. King, we all know, Dr. King is a hero to so many, but Nelson Mandela is your hero. You were at the White House during the Clinton administration, and you've talked about, it's not quite the same, I suppose, hearing your father speak, his booming.
Oh, really? Please.
Boom.
Well, I try to sum it up this way in the words of my mother. She said, struggle is a never-ending process freedom is never really won. You win it and you earn it in every generation. And even though they may not be able to identify with the particular struggle of a Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King Jr., there are particular struggles that we live in this generation of time, and that they need to draw strength from those in the past and lessons and examples from those in the past that they can utilize in their current life situation to make a difference in the world, because we've all been placed here to make a difference, to serve humanity. And make us into a greater nation and ultimately a greater world.
Bernice King, truly a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Brooke.
You got it.
The world is quickly preparing for what may be the largest gathering of heads of state since Winston Churchill's funeral in 1965. Representing the U.S. alone will be Presidents Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Jimmy Carter, comprising one of the most prestigious frequent flyer clubs in the world. Today, Air Force One departed for South Africa, where more than 90 world leaders are planning to attend Nelson Mandela's Memorial Tuesday in Johannesburg. Inside Air Force One, the Obamas and George W. and Laura Bush, along with former First Lady Clinton. The former President Bill and daughter Chelsea are flying from an event in Rio and linking up with the rest of the club tomorrow. President George H.W. Bush, who's been in poor health for some time, will not be making the trip. Together, they're set for an almost 20-hour flight, even though there's only one bed on board.
Air Force One is a very intimate setting, so that's a place where you can have quieter conversation. Once you get to one of these massive events, it's very hard to have real conversations.
These long flights, believe it or not, can forge friendships. In 1981, President Ronald Reagan could not attend the funeral of Egypt's Anwar Sadat, so he enlisted Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and Jimmy Carter to attend instead. The flight was said to be initially awkward and very long, but one notable friendship emerged, evident at Ford's funeral more than 25 years later, when Jimmy Carter eulogized his longtime friend.
For myself and for our nation, I want to thank my predecessor.
Fast forward to 1992, Bill Clinton and President George H.W. Bush were fighting a bitter presidential contest. But 7 years later, when they traveled together to attend the funeral of Jordan's King Hussein in 1999, that ice began to thaw. That ice began to thaw. That ice began to thaw. And now they're partners in philanthropy all over the world. Such a gathering of most or all living presidents is typically reserved only for monumental, usually sad events. The journey itself holds the potential for conflict and resolution on a first-class scale.
It's going to make a big, big difference in the atmospherics on Air Force One with George W. Bush there with his successor. That President Bush has been so reserved in making any negative comments. He's not second-guessing his successor, and I think that the Obama people really appreciate that.
This gang has seen more of each other than usual. In April, the group suited up to attend the dedication of the George W. Bush Presidential Library in Texas. Then in August, Clinton, Obama, and Carter joined forces to honor the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington.
No former president likes to be marginalized. They've always been the center of attention.
In Washington, U.S. President George Bush, who telephoned Mandela, said it's too early for him to decide what to do about sanctions.
That did not come up. I will address that at appropriate time. There's no time frame. I will be discussing that with our top advisors, and I look forward to having more to say about that later on. At appropriate time. There's no time frame. I will